Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our Clinical Express webinar on systematic prompt fading templates. I am going to show my screen now. Let's see here. Cool. So I'm your host today, Nick Schreiber. I'm one of the ABH subject matter experts here at CR. And I also have my colleague Kim on the line who will be able to assist you in the chat. So we'll kind of be working together. So the little bit of content that we're going to be going through today, since this is our third Express webinar, is here on the advanced criterion templates. Now, if anyone has wanted to see these other webinars, we do have them posted. Or if you had signed up for them previously, they would have been sent to your email if you didn't come. And I can also give you access to these as well. So what today is going to be talking about is these advanced criterion templates. So just think setting up systematic prompt fading templates, same way as the task analysis, but for other goals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide over here. But the first thing that I want to do for you is I'm going to give you access to the CentralReach clinical manual. So if you log into your CR account, and I'll send this in chat right now, if you log into your CR account and you use this URL, this is going to redirect you to this website, and this will help you to download the clinical manual. Now, it takes a moment to load, so don't be alarmed if it takes like 30 seconds for this page to come up, 30 or 45 seconds, but it'll take you right here. And as long as you're logged into your CR account, you'll be able to purchase this, and you'll find the manual in your library and purchased items. So this is what the clinical manual looks like. We've got a syllabus right at the top. What we're going to be focusing on today is actually one of the components of this criterion and prompting course. So it's the same thing that we're seeing right here. It's just going to be talking about systematic prompt fading templates. And if any of you guys have any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. Like I said, it's going to be a short amount of content, and I'll most likely be able to address other questions you have and demonstrate them on the screen. So anything related to the clinical module is fair game. We'll be able to discuss kind of anything you guys want to talk about. So I'm going to scroll back over to here, and the next webinar that we have as well is Goal Auto Progression with Criterion. So I will send you guys the link to this. It hasn't quite been posted yet, but here in the chat, if you guys want to come to this Goal Auto Progression Criterion, that'll be 2 weeks from now, same time, same place, we'll be able to do that. It's cool. So I am going to scroll over to here, and what we're going to be talking about today are systematic prompt fading templates at the admin level. So if you kind of navigate to your Learn module and go to Settings, what we're going to be talking about is the criterion and prompting one. Now, if you don't have access to any of these buttons, you can always ask your administrator for access to them. And what those are, at least the permission that's needed for those, I'm going to go into my permissions module. Let's see here. And the permission to do what we're going to do today is living here in Learn, and it is the criterion and prompting templates manage. So the reason that this is permissioned off is this is a global setting, and this will give everyone access to these. So again, if you need access to this, tell your administrator that you need the Learn module permission for criterion and prompting templates, and that gives you this. So right here in this criterion and prompting settings, you'll see a bunch of these that are red that say system, and then a few other options here. I mean, my test account is Midgar, which is why you see the other Midgars right there. One we're going to be talking about today is this one. So all these templates are available for you. And if you do like what you see here and want to use the systematic prompt fading templates, we actually have them right here. So if you do like what you see, you can always just duplicate it, and then your account owns this as well. So I'm going to click on this systematic prompt fading. Now, for those of you that have spent some time in the criterion templates, or I'm going to go back to the other one. For those of you that have spent some time in the criterion templates, or those that haven't, think of logic statements. You know, if my data point or my trial is this, what do I want the system to do for me? Now, one thing that's different from what we talked about on 2 webinars ago, the within session prompt fading, where all of your prompts are living within a single intervention phase. In this one, what you're going to notice is that intervention criterion 1 has a full verbal prompt. When a learner is successful at a full verbal prompt, they'll be able to advance to the next intervention phase at a partial verbal. When they're successful there, they'll be able to advance to a phonemic. When they're successful there, we can move to the regular intervention phase, which just means there aren't any prompts on there. So I'm going to navigate to a session and show you kind of what this does for you. So navigating to my sample session. And for those of you that have been on webinars with me before, one thing that I give you access to as well is this sample session. So inside of that clinical manual, you can actually find this and just import the whole thing from the library. So if I was to go over here, the sample session actually lives within these goal template samples. And this is a master ABA book. We have full behavior plans in there and a litany of other types of programming that's set up to the complete nines, all the instruction notes, all the criterion. So if you ever wanted to bring on new staff and kind of give them master examples of what it really looks like to kind of master the clinical module, you can give them this just by importing it into a learning tree. So scrolling over here, this is what we're going to be focusing on today, these systematic prompt fading templates. And what this means is that we need a learner to be completely independent on a skill or using the prescribed prompt that we've got. So if I start my session, I'm just going to check one thing. I'm just going to turn that off. So what you're seeing right here is I scored this value as a full physical, which is set at 100%. So this works the same exact way as the task analysis does. So if we were to go to the same thing, like a forward chain, this is also systematic prompt fading, where when the learner is successful at the level we require, over a certain period of time, so if I do this one more time, we're going to see the prompts fading automatically. So in most cases, we see systematic prompt fading for task analyses, but this can also be used for any types of goals, whether or not you're doing a receptive ID, where you want to start with the full physical. Show me the dog, hand over hand, points to the dog. Eventually, kind of guides the elbow, or just kind of points to, pick that one. With your physical prompt, just kind of pointing at it. So in here, there is one setting that's very, very important for the systematic prompt fading, and that's the count prompts as positive option. So inside of one of these goals, and one thing that is a really cool part of our sessions is this button right here, this arrow with this box with an arrow pointing outside of it. So this is the tool that we use kind of in tandem with this sample session to reverse engineer anything you find. So if you ever click this button, it takes you to the corresponding learning tree to that exact goal that you clicked on. So I'm here on my systematic prompt fading goal. Now, systematic prompt fading typically works best with the % independent data collection type, just because it gives the therapist one button to click. Because if you're fading your prompts, you want to know, hey, they were at the full approximation of what we were looking for, or they were at the prompt level that we're prescribing at that moment. So % independent is what we see used most often, but what's most important about templates like this is scrolling below this criterion is to leave this option unchecked. Now, by leaving this unchecked, we're saying that these prompts right here are going to be considered to be correct. So right now in the system, it's either all the prompts are correct or all of them are incorrect. So by choosing that option, what we're saying is my no response and error will be considered failed trials. And just as a little reminder, what the no response and errors are really used for is, think of in a situation like manding, where you walk up to your learner and I'm like, ooh, I've got these really, really tasty cookies. My learner says, hey, can I have a cookie? I'm like, of course you can. That's my independent. Versus, ooh, I've got these really, really tasty cookies, and my learner walks away from me. No response at all. There clearly wasn't an MO in place. Or another scenario, I'm sitting at the table doing kind of collecting data in the last one while the learner's in a reinforcement period. I'm like, ooh, I've got these tasty cookies, and my learner's in the other room. I was setting up the occasion for my learner demand, and I screwed up myself. So that's what we see these used most often as. Error is pretty much the therapist error versus, and you could use these for other things. The no response and error are both going to be counted as 0, but it's kind of what we see most often is an error being a therapist error and a no response being a stimulus control issue. So what we were kind of getting at here is what's going to make the value go up, because this is what the data point is. So independent is always, full approximation of what you're looking for. And the full physical is, hey, they made it at the prescribed, but we're considering that to be a correct trial as well, because you're fading those individual prompts. So what we're going to end up doing, and if this is a repeat for anybody, I apologize, but we'll actually go through and build a criterion template from the ground up, showing you all of this. And if any of this doesn't make sense, or you want a little bit of a review, this same exact information can be found here in the criterion and prompting section. Kind of under this first video, it shows you how to kind of build these criteria, or second video rather, how to build these custom criterion templates. And I think, yeah, this is the second longest video in the whole entire sequence, coming in at, a whole 14 minutes long. So you'll be able to see kind of all of this same thing being built from the ground up. So as long as you have the permissions to do this, what we're going to do is go to the clinical module, here into settings and criterion and prompting. So the super easy way is to just hit the copy button, but I definitely want to spend a little bit of time showing you guys kind of what all of the other options are. So in the event you didn't have some of these or wanted to build one from the ground up, you can hit the add new button. It's going to say name your template. So systematic prompt fading, and it's typically best to specify what prompting hierarchy you're using. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. Got my awesome colleague on the line too. And then kind of after we're done with this, I'll be able to demonstrate any other questions that kind of come up that I can show on the screen for you. Let's do physical. So I've got my systematic prompt fading physical template. I'm gonna hit save. And what this is asking you first is, think of this like build your buckets of logic statements. So I'm just going to hit the add new criterion. I need a bucket for baseline logic statements. The next one, intervention. I need my bucket for intervention phases. So I'm just going to hit the copy button there. And in templates like this, I'm actually going to stop right there, because I can actually duplicate these intervention phases, because the only difference is going to be the prompting level there. And then I'll kind of use those to build in my generalization and maintenance criterion as well. So starting with baseline, I'm going to build the same exact thing that I had in the other one. I'm going to hit this add new button, and let's go a little bit through these calculation types. We're going to end up building a logic statement, which again tells the system what to do. So in some cases, if a learner's in baseline, we want to test, do they actually have this skill or not? So if they meet our mastery criterion right away, we can just go right to maintenance. So here in the calculation types, it's greater than, less than, equal to, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. But we want to start with a mastery criterion. So I'm going to say greater than, and it's greater than what? What percentage value? Because we're playing around with the percent correct and percent independent. So y-axis of 0 to 100, a lot of cases we'll see something like 80%, 90%, or equal to 100. So I'm saying data point 1, when we're in baseline, if my value is greater than or equal to 80, now I need to specify over what span of time or whatever span of data points we've got. So here in this frame type, consecutive calendar days is something that you most likely won't use, because this means that you have to take data pretty much on Saturday and Sunday because it has to be consecutive days in a row. So if you meet with a therapist or meet with a learner on Thursday, Friday, and not on Saturday and Sunday, but then again on Monday, well, Monday is actually the first data point within that criterion. So typically we don't see this run all that often. Consecutive days with data collected is a little more forgiving. This means you can take data on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and as long as the learner meets the criterion, you're golden. Consecutive data points is very liberal, and so is the average of consecutive data points. It's pretty much the same thing, but if your therapist gets very click happy and says 100% of that trial, graph button, 100% of that trial, graph button, 100% graph, you could theoretically master something out within 30 seconds, depending on how quickly they're taking data. So again, what we see used most often is consecutive days with data collected. Consecutive error responses, we'll talk about this in kind of the next bucket of baseline, because right now we're just focusing on the mastery criterion. So consecutive days with data collected, and now you specify how many of those days. So again, if we watch right here, we're seeing this logic statement being built. So what we have it as right now is we're saying, if my value is greater than or equal to 80 over 3 days that we're taking data, we want to auto progress to maintenance because this is a mastery criterion. They're just getting the skill right away. Now, what's really cool here is automatically drop in your phase change lines. You're all set. And also, you can mark the goal as met, leaving baseline. Because if my learner's successful here, across their 3 days, they've got it. The other alternative and what's living within these master templates is actually something that looks like this, where it's saying, hey, in my first data point, and you could have multiple trials here. But if you're probing this, 3 different times in the session, an hour apart. Let's see if I can find my sample session. Cool. So what logic statement that we've got right here is, let's see, is effectively if you were to say, they got it, tested an hour later, they got it, tested an hour later, they got it, while it's still in baseline, that within that single data point, there are your 3 trials, but it does meet the 100% criterion. So inside of here, if you did want your baseline set up over a period of days, to truly ensure this learner has it, you could set that as 3, but what we see it used most often is at a 1. Okay, so let's see here. So we're saying if greater than or equal to 80 over 1 consecutive data point, progress to maintenance. That's our mastery criterion. But now we may need some failure criterion, the criterion to intervene. So I'm going to hit the plus button right here, and let's do our failure criterion. Now, for starters, the easiest one is consecutive error responses. What's really nice about this one is you can say on day 1, if they get a minus, minus, minus in a row, automatically advance right to the intervention phase, which is what this one does. You can drop in a phase change line because it's moving from baseline to intervention. So this one is actually pretty restrictive, but the nice thing about this particular logic statement is that it allows you to intervene on something immediately. So if you're testing that 3 times within that first session and they're not getting it on any of them, point to ball, don't get it. Point to ball, they don't get it. Point to ball, they don't get it. By the time you're presenting that 4th trial, you're going to be able to intervene right away. So I promise we're almost to the systematic prompt fading piece, and then rest will go pretty quick. But typically there's one more piece that we'll add to the baseline, and that's the inverse to this one. So the consecutive error responses is within session fading or within session advancement to the intervention, but you may want a cross session advancement. You may want to say, you know what, I want the next therapist to come in and do the teaching procedures. So what we're going to end up doing is making the reverse of that one. So if less than 80% over that same 1 data point, so this would typically be that first session, proceed to the intervention phase. again, automatically drop in your phase change line, and we are good to go for baseline. Now, this is pretty much the same thing that we have in these master templates right there. But now the really, really fun stuff. So going into intervention here, we actually want to use a very similar mastery criterion. But for the mastery, we're pretty much saying they're mastering that one step. So we're not actually using the mark goal is met at this point. So I'm going to add my plus button. I'm going to build in my greater than or equal to a value of 80%, or really whatever you want. Maybe you want it as 100 over my consecutive days with data collected. So this means I need 3 days at my I need 3 days at my prompt level before advancing to the next, but also dropping in a phase change line. So I'm going to leave this mark goal as mastered right now, and I'm going to minimize some of these to just see what's going to happen next. So we have a blank intervention criterion. The prompts aren't listed here yet, but we want to use this about 3 more times. So in this progress to, this is specifying where do you want this goal to go to. And in the systematic prompt fading, we always want the next item in hierarchy because it means show me the next bucket that's appearing. Whereas we certainly wouldn't want to regress back to maintenance or back to baseline. And we certainly wouldn't want to advance to maintenance right away because we have to train this in that systematic methodology. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to crack open this intervention criterion just by clicking there. I'm going to hit copy. So with my hitting copy, let's see here. Where's my, oops. Cool. So I made a duplicate of it. It just appeared right here, but I'm going to need a few more. And you'll see why in a moment. So cool. So I've got all of my intervention criterion right here. Could always add in regression criterion, which I may do in a moment. In fact, let me actually just do that. Let me delete these other two and we'll do that next. We'll add in our regression criterion. So starting in this intervention criterion, this is where you click right here and you're going to specify what prompt level is the learner starting at. So I want my learner starting at a full physical. That's all that I really need for there because that's the only prompt that's going to appear. The next one, we just click on it again and we type in partial physical. So I've got my partial physical. We're good to go there. Now, the part that I just kind of remembered on here was, what if the learner is not successful at the partial physical? We certainly want to intervene again. So I'm going to add one more tier of bucket, the reverse of this one, saying if less than 80 over 3 days, go to the previous item in the hierarchy. So start working at the full physical again. So I'm going to crack this open and I'm going to hit my plus button. And now let's do if less than my value of 80% over the same period of time, we want to regress. So let's see here, previous item in hierarchy. Let's see, should do it. Just checking the user interface. Oh, why did I? Looks like I changed it on the other one, so I'll add that back in here. Cool. So we've got if less than 80 over 3 days, regress to the previous. So now I'm going to just put my mastery criterion back in. So if greater than or equal to my value of 80 over my 3 consecutive days with data collected, I want to also go to the next item. Drop in my phase change lines. And again, we don't want to mark this as met yet because marking it as met is going to exist on the final intervention phase. So we've started with our full physical. Again, can't regress anywhere, not going back to baseline. But once we move to full physical to the partial, so kind of fading back your prompts, we've got our mastery criterion, but we've also got the regression criterion that if they're not getting it, move back here. So the reason that I kind of deleted those other two and added one here is I can just hit the copy button here and snag those other ones. Let's see here. Just gonna refresh my screen. Cool, because we're going to end up using this one a couple more times. So copy, copy, cool. And then one more copy, cool. So I'm gonna minimize all of these, and I may have added one too many, but we'll be able to see. Oh, it was doing that the whole time. So I'm gonna need to delete a few. So we need the first one to be at full, second one to be at partial, the next one to be at gestural. And now we actually are going to delete the prompt from this one because this is going to end up being our independent phase. And I'm going to clear out, or actually I can leave those there for right now. We'll change those. So we started a full, advanced to partial, advanced to gestural, advanced the independent, but now we may want to do a generalization phase. So it's actually really easy to swap these, keeping the same logic statements, is cut out the prompt, change it to generalization, and now tell the system where to go next. We can still keep the regression, and we can still keep the progress item to next in hierarchy. So in this particular field, you don't necessarily have to tell it go to your next phase, because it's going to go there anyway. So from intervention, by saying next item in hierarchy, it's going to go to generalization. So you don't even need to worry about that. So with this last one, I'm going to clear out this one. But now you guys know that there are kind of different ways to build the criterion. And one of them is using our maintenance. So what's nice about this maintenance criterion, and let's see here, I'm just going to clear that one out because I need to use the hierarchical. So we've got our standard kind of stock baseline, our intervention phases, our generalization. But when I'm adding this new bucket, you'll see the difference between hierarchical and maintenance. So for the hierarchical, what this is going to do is kind of have the goals in the data sheet every single day. Whereas the maintenance allows you to skip the data sheet. So you tell the system how many sessions do you want to skip. And a session is determined by a distinct start and stop of this. So as long as you're kind of graphing in there, you're going to be fine. But when you're graphing all and hitting end, that's deemed to be a session. So scrolling over here, I'm going to say, you know what? I have on average of 3 sessions per week. So let's just say skip for 5 sessions and reappear. I may want to add in another bucket, but I can always duplicate it. And then we put in our logic statements here. I'm going to do it the same way as those, very, very similar. So because this is only appearing every 5th session, you most likely want to have your frame value very low and give a little bit of leeway on the criterion value. So by me saying greater than or equal to a value of 80% over one data point, this means that if they mastered it on that 5 sessions passing, so kind of session number 6, you're going to test it once. So within one individual data point. Now, the reason I don't recommend putting this at 100 is if you didn't have appropriate stimulus control, that's considered a failed trial. So if your learner wasn't paying attention, gives you the ability to be like, hey, ask them 2 or 3 more times if they've got it, we may not need to re-intervene immediately. In which case you would just say, hey, kick all the way back to intervention. So what we've got right here is greater than or equal to one data point at 80%. So again, you can add in a phase change line. So we've got our kind of master criterion right here. So I want to say next time in hierarchy. So there are some scenarios where the learner gets to this part and they're now unsuccessful. This is where the regression to previous item isn't really as applicable. You might want to say regress all the way back to the top of the intervention phase. So the way that you build that is saying less than, your 80% over your same one data point, and auto regress right back to intervention, because this allows you to re-intervene over that same value. Now, what's nice here is we can use the same exact duplicate. So I'm going to hit the copy button. Looks like I got to refresh first. So I'm going to hit my copy button, and I want a couple more of these. And you can do as many as you want. It depends on how far you want to tier your goal. But in a lot of cases, I see something like this. Skip for 5 sessions, once a week. Skip for 10 sessions, once every other week. Skip for 15 sessions, once every few weeks. So right here, this is an example of doing a systematic prompt fading template, which starts at the individual prompts, kind of goes to the next level, goes to the next level, goes to independent, and then eventually using your maintenance criterion. So apologize that took a little bit of while to build out, but the good news is if you like using templates like this, they already live in your account. Simple modifications could be done. You just take one of these systematic prompt fading templates, hit the copy button, and the only real modification you would need to do is maybe you want to change the prompt buttons, or maybe you want to add another layer, or maybe you want it at a 90% or 100%. You have those options. So that is actually all that I had for today. But if you guys have any questions that you want to send them in the chat, I can kind of answer anything that comes up. But to the rest of you, I hope you have a really, really wonderful day. So I just got a question in the chat right now about adding any other types of prompts that are not listed. So what's really kind of cool, and I saw another question about this in the chat, was about PECs as well. You can add in any type of prompt. So if you look right here, I use these kind of as PECs where my prompts are, pick up a picture, learner successful at that level, versus my learner successful at picking up and extending, versus picking up, extending, and releasing. I can code as a value of independent. And the way that you can get access to this is kind of looking into the criterion, but it's not actually using the criterion, it's using prompts in lieu of criterion. So I had just navigated back to this, to my sample session, and I just got another question in the chat asking, hey, can I get the access to this? And it's actually part of the clinical manual, but I'll show you how to use it. So here in this nonverbal communication, so that is my PECS example, the way that this was built was just typing in the prompts that I wanted to use right here. So this created those buttons. So that's how you add in other prompts that aren't listed. This drop-down menu, this isn't every single prompt. You can type in my own prompt. Oops. And then just kind of click on it and your prompts are right there. So that's how you add in the custom ones. You don't need to choose any prompts from the drop-down menu if you don't want to. So the question that I got, I just got was, how do I make this sample session work? So what you do is once you download the clinical manual, you go to clinical and learning trees and you make a brand new learning tree as you normally would, but talk to your administrator and perhaps you could use a patient test because that's kind of the one that's standard in our organizations. So sample program book, you hit create learning tree. And the way that you have this sample session is, again, you need the clinical manual for this. You hit add branch from library, you crack open the clinical manual, and you navigate down here to goal template samples. The first one you see is the ABA client goal book. So you just click on the things that are below here. You hit add selected, and this is that master program book. So let's see here. So I still have some others on the line as well. So I'll actually show you some of the things that are in here if kind of over the next few minutes. And if any other questions do arise, please feel free to send those to me. And what this is going to give you, And of course, you create a session of this, but what it's going to give you is the same sample session here. So we have examples that are similar to VBMAP. We've got examples that are kind of inspired by PECs. And by the way, all of the instructional notes are all filled out. All of the description boxes that we thought would be useful are filled out from those as well. Here's an example of what Kaufman Cards could look like in the system. These were custom prompts as well, specifying, kind of shaping opportunities where the learner is versus full approximation. This one is an example right here of aggregating goals together. So using the task analysis branch, if you have a litany of targets that you're working on, you have the ability to kind of put these all in as steps. So if you're always running all of the words in a deck, why not put them all in there within that same data point? Because you will be able to see which of these targets they got wrong in the raw data, and by hovering over the data point as well to see all of those. Here's another VBMAP style goal, another VBMAP style goal. This one is just a standard motor imitation, within session prompt fading. So it gives the therapist the autonomy to be like, oh, I tried a gestural. They either got it or they didn't. I tried a full partial physical. They either got it or they didn't. But finally, they got it at full physical. But I want to call that a failed trial. So the next question we got is, I added the clinical manual, but it's not showing up in my library. So you're downloading about 5 hours of videos from me. So it may take a couple minutes for all those to load, because what's happening in the background in your account is all of those videos, I think it's about 4 hours long. All of those videos are currently being imported into your files module. So in the next few minutes, oh cool. In the next few minutes, it should be loading. If you don't see it yet, you'll check your shopping cart, or also if you click on the Learn module in Marketplace, you can click on Order History. So you may not have actually completed the purchase, because just adding it to cart doesn't actually buy. You need to agree to the terms of the Marketplace. So the next one we've got here is an example of pattern completion and what that can look like in the system with a pretty advanced error correction procedure. One of the cooler programs that we've got here is things like color seriation. So I've got the pictures for the therapist already here. Same instructions, put these in order of blank to blank. And what's nice about this particular workflow using this task analysis is you're able to actually identify where the learner has the stimulus control issues. So if the learner's consistently getting light gray and dark gray incorrect, you'll be able to see that in the raw data history. I mean, your data point is going to be 50%, but you'll be able to see where you need to do a little bit of discrimination training. But where this is more so applicable is, I wonder if I deleted it. Oh, no, it's right there, is other things like sequencing. So very much like seriation, where the stimulus control issues, if you had 5 or 6 steps in sequencing cards, this is going to tell you exactly where the errors are. So instead of just a value of they got the entire sequence or they didn't, you'll have the history on how they're doing on all of them. So let's see here. So task analysis, again, is pretty powerful. The next kind of examples that we've got right here are a way to do multi-response feature function class. Because as we know, that's a lot of different exemplars that you're going to be using, and that could take up a lot of space in these data sheets. So you can actually merge them together. So for this one is the feature branch for appliances. So show me the one that has a pot. Oh, they picked the coffee maker. Show me the one that has a dish rack. Or, I mean, I don't know how socially significant this is, but when I started on this one, it just kept going with it. So I don't know how many learners necessarily need to know which one has a lint trap or a clothes agitator, but just kind of an example for you guys to look at. So their one is the feature. Here's the one that's a function. Show me the one that makes coffee. And what's really cool here is once you have all of these trained, you could do the multi-response FFC. So if you're using a prompt, something like a coffee maker is a type of appliance, it has a pot and it makes coffee. So kind of giving the learner more ability to respond in different ways to describe things. So got an exemplar of all of those, kind of merging them together. Next one we've got is an example of probe. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send them in the chat. We've got about 3 minutes left. Otherwise, I'll kind of keep showing some of the samples that are here in this book. Right here, we've got an example of a whole chain TA. So again, all of our steps are on acquisition. So they're all bold. And the little spiel about it is right there as well. What we had seen at the very beginning was an example of a forward chain. And for you, those of you that wanted access to the previous webinar, we can get that to you. So we got hand washing, and currently on this step, session goes by, they got it. Next session goes by, they got it. Next session goes by, they got it. Fading back to prompts. This is again that systematic prompt fading, but this is for as it relates to TAs. And the last thing that we've kind of got on here are a 2-tiered task analysis for toileting. So everything prior to a bowel movement, tracking that. These were custom prompts, just gestural and verbal, the same way that PEX one was set up. And then right here, so we've got another toileting one right here. So I just got a question in the chat about if we have a backward chain for shoe tying. Now, with backward chains and forward chains, they're very, very, very specific to the learners. So we don't have those templated out because you need to specify within those TAs exactly what steps the learners need and exactly what prompt levels that they need as well, because the system will auto-generate that for you. So typically we don't see those set up in templates other than if the criteria are left blank and they're just used for those clients. Now, if you were to always be running a TA in the same exact way across all clients, you absolutely could do that, but I've actually never seen that in kind of the CR ecosystem up until this point, is kind of building out all those templates at the very beginning. Typically, it's build out all the steps and then have the system generate just the criterion they need, because you're most likely going to be eliminating some of those pinpoints if you don't need them. So everything prior to a bowel movement versus everything, everything prior to a bowel movement versus everything after, since you'll most likely be training everything prior more often than everything after, especially if you're practicing going to the bathroom often. And then in my last minute that I've got here, some of the neat things down here is it just gives you different workflows for tracking newly emerging mans. So putting in comments, building reinforcer-rich environments, kind of specifying to therapists, here's what you do. This newly emerging mans works really, really well with this novel aberrant behavior, because if you haven't purchased the ABC type, you can always just take this as the initial tracking. And last thing I've got is just to show you this DRO. It's got behavior plans on a few of these. And these templates for behavior reduction also lives here in the clinical manual underneath goal template samples. It's in the behavior reduction template. So for any of you that have purchased this, you can go and use that right away. So that means I am out of time, but I'll actually hang around because I talked a lot. I will hang around for another couple minutes. And if any of you guys have any questions, please feel free to send them. But again, thank you so much for attending.